let's begin by this.
Sure.
Do me a favor and introduce yourself to anybody that's listening.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Adam Black. I'm the Senior Vice President, Design and Construction at TA Realty, which is kind of a new player in the developer data center market. Previous to that, I spent 6 years at Google, 3 years at Facebook prior to that, QTS for a short stint, and then I can keep going back. But that's kind of all the most relevant things.
Well, I like to take it from that part, and then we will go to the very beginning, so to speak, and then let's build into it a little bit, and then let's pick up where that part left off. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So where are you from originally?
Grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, about a half hour south of the airport in a town called Jonesboro, kind of famous for Smokey and the Bandit. They recorded a bunch of the Smokey and the Bandit scenes there. There's one in the very beginning. I remember when the truck pulls up to load all the Coors beer into the back of the trailer. That was the hardware store that my dad and I used to shop at when I was a kid, which is pretty cool.
Were you there when they were filming it?
Oh, no. That was before I was born. I was born in 78. So it was, I think it was before 78.
I would say that movie's probably late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, it was right around then. But yeah, that was kind of a big deal.
For T. Justice, wasn't that the sheriff that was chasing him down?
No, that was Boss Hogg.
Oh, okay. My bad.
No, was it Boss? No, Boss Hogg was...
Boss Hogg was Boss Hogg, right?
He was the Dukes of Hazzard, wasn't he? I don't know. I get them all mixed up.
But I do like the cowboy hat that sheriff wore. So I have the same one as the open road. I got like 5 versions of it, and I take shit every time I wear it. Right? But I just like that style. I just like that old school style. But so are you like? Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, only child. My parents tried a little bit to have some other children, didn't work out. So it's just me.
So growing
real tight family
in Georgia. Sounds a little bit rural then if they're filming Smoking the Bandit.
Yeah, it was. Parts of it were rural.
Like how far from Atlanta?
Probably a 35-minute drive to Atlanta.
How tall are you?
6'1".
So were you always 6'1"?
I've always been a big kid. Yeah.
So were you playing football?
No, I didn't play any football. I was in
Georgia.
Yeah. I got into music. I tried some sports. I played soccer when I was a kid. Just didn't really stick. I wasn't fast enough for it. They tried to talk me into football. I think I played 1 year in middle school and said, this is not for me. And I doubled down on music. And
tambourine?
I play the bass. I started off on the violin. I wanted to play guitar. My mom said I had to play the violin first. So I did that for a few years and then bought me a guitar and I never looked back. And then I started playing the bass. It's been a while. It's a perishable skill, and if you don't keep it up, then it doesn't go well.
Like anything else, you need proficiency.
Right. I came up playing guitar, and then when I got in high school, I tried to join the jazz band. They already had a guitar player, so they said, hey, do you want to play the bass? And I said, yes, and then I fell in love with the bass. So I consider myself a bass player, but I play the guitar too.
So, but on who were some of the people that inspired or influenced you? Like the bass player, like a certain rock band?
Oh, gosh.
It's like, who were your music? Who were you emulating?
So I came up playing jazz.
Really?
Yeah. So I was
jazz kid in the country and 45 minutes out of Georgia. Okay. I was
a jazz bassist for quite some time. And then I've always been into my parents' music. So I grew up listening to 60s and 70s rock and roll. All my buddies are listening to Vanilla Ice. I was spinning Allman Brothers and Led Zeppelin and all the good
Great
stuff.
Music, all the best.
Yeah. So, I mean, all the bass players from that era were, special then and keep a special place in my heart now.
I still listen to a lot of that music. I grew up with my parents were the same. So I really enjoy the music that my parents grew up listening to, which is funny because my kids listen to their generation of music plus mine, which is like, Pearl Jam and all that stuff. And then they listen to the stuff I listen to, which is my parents. So my kids have an incredible array of music. I imagine yours do.
Yeah,
too.
they do. They do. My son especially. My daughter sings a little bit, but neither of them play an instrument, which is kind of weird because I think I counted them the other day. I've probably got 20 guitars and basses at the house.
No
piano,
kidding.
Drums, the whole bit. I got it all. And they just weren't interested in learning how to play an instrument. Now my son, he's getting ready to graduate from high school, and he's asked me recently, like, hey, you think I could take some piano lessons? I think it might be good for me, and I'd like to learn something. So that would be cool. And that's an instrument I don't play. So I'm like, hey, all right, let's do it. Let's learn together.
Piano's on my bucket list, but just recently, I've never been a big music fan. But by the way, since you're here in Austin, go to the Elephant Room.
Okay.
Live jazz every night. It's fantastic. It's my favorite place to listen to music in downtown Austin. I mean, there's Stubbs and there's, Antoine's. There's you could find, I think the CMT Awards are in Austin tonight, right? So like,
it's Sunday night.
Whatever it is, there's tons of music and you're never going to find a shortage. You can go see Paul Cawthon at Stubbs, and I think that man's a pioneer. There's some great music, right?
Awesome.
But for jazz, the consistent place is Elephant Room downtown. So take Mama there tonight. And you guys, I'll show you where it's at, but great jazz. So you grew up with jazz and then you listen to the good music.
Grew up with jazz. Yeah. Listen to good music. played in a handful of rock and roll bands and country bands and just
Through high
kind of
school?
anything. Yeah, through high school and through college. Played a lot in college.
What were your parents? What did they do?
So my dad's in the construction industry. He was in the Navy in Vietnam.
So he's genius.
Yeah,
basically.
well, of course.
He's a Navy guy that
Yeah.
builds. I like it.
His father passed away while he was deployed to Vietnam, or was getting ready to pass away. So they gave him emergency leave home, and he stayed and just finished his service locally in Atlanta. His father, my grandfather, was a plumber. Came up through the field and worked his way into the office and was a draftsman, a professional draftsman. So he worked for a big mechanical contractor in Atlanta. So anybody listening who works in the Atlanta market is going to know about McKinney's Incorporated, McKinney's Mechanical Contracting.
Sure.
The guy who was running McKinney's at the time, the elder McKinney, he came to visit the house after my grandfather had passed away and basically just told my dad, like, hey, quit your job at the car dealership. He was a Pontiac mechanic. He's a car nerd, so he was into that. He said, you're quitting your job at the Pontiac dealership and you're coming to work for me. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know. And that's exactly what he did. And he's had a long career in mechanical contracting, worked his way into project management, and then specialized in estimating. So he was a fuel oil piping genius, a lot of work at the Atlanta airport. Then he got into med gas and specialized in that and built a lot of hospitals. And then he got into data centers, which is
No
kind of
way.
fun. He got into data centers after I got into data centers. So it's pretty
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so when you were growing up, you were a musician, and at that time, were you thinking you're going to go be a professional musician, or were you thinking,
No, I
like, I
wanted
may go get into construction like my
Yeah,
dad?
I wanted to be an engineer. I
did.
wanted to, my initial idea was to go get an electrical engineering degree, and I wanted to get into telecommunications, designing mobile phones, right? That was
Really?
kind of a new thing when I was coming out of high school, and they started to become more and more popular. I said, that's something. It's going to be huge. I don't know what it's going to look like in 20 years, but this is
I wanna be a part of
something
it.
that I'd like to do. So when I graduated high school, I went to Georgia Tech as an electrical engineering major. Didn't go well my first year, and
It's
I
tough
was
school,
yeah, it was
man.
tough. And I'm sitting in these classes, and all these other students are so much more higher performing than me. And I said, man, there's no way I'm getting the job that I want working for Ericsson or Nokia or one of those companies at the time designing mobile handsets when I've got all this competition and everybody wanted to do it. So pulled out of that major, actually pulled out of Georgia Tech and finished my core classes at a local community college to try to figure out what I wanted to do, and went back to tech with a management degree focused on engineering management, which has paid off in spades
Nice.
over the years. Yeah.
How did you? That's very focused. I mean, you obviously had some. Did someone give you? Do you have some mentors in those days, or some
No.
guidance? How do you know that was
No.
the degree to pursue?
Honestly, I think it was blind luck. To some degree, the decision was influenced by the fact that jumping on the M train, that's what they call it at Georgia Tech, might have been a little easier pathway to get through. And I figured I can finish, I can get my degree, and then I can try to work my way into whatever industry I want, or
Oh, so
get a
by
master's
then-
degree or something. But yeah,
Were you still thinking about getting into like Sony and Ericsson and getting a mobile, mobile
I
devices?
kind of gave up on that after I terminated the electrical engineering program. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And my dad was working at another mechanical contractor, not McKinney's, in Atlanta at the time. They were doing a bunch of different kinds of work, and got a summer job with those guys
Like
while
an
I was still in
internship or-
college. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I really like this. My very first construction project I ever worked on was the Federal Reserve Bank replacement project in Atlanta, Georgia. So in Midtown, they had an old bank downtown. They built a new bank in Midtown, and I was working for the mechanical contractor on that job. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Interesting diversion. So I met my wife at Georgia Tech, Christy. We met at the Christian Campus Fellowship, which is a church group.
Mhm.
And we had decided we were going to get married, and we wanted to go be missionaries. We were going to go plant another similar college campus ministry somewhere else. She went to seminary. I interned for a year after school at that campus ministry where we met. Moved up with her after my year was up.
Where
and
was up? Where?
she was in Johnson City, Tennessee.
Okay.
So I moved up there, couldn't find a job to save my life. And we had this decision point like 2 months after we were married. We said, okay, we can run up the credit cards and stick this out. Or I had a standing job offer with that mechanical contractor in Atlanta. We talked about it a lot, thought through it, decided to go back to Atlanta and engage in the workforce. So I took that job, started my career with a mechanical contractor called Mallory and Evans in Atlanta, Georgia, and had a great ride with those
How old were
guys.
you? Like 21, 22?
Yeah, it's probably 22 at that point.
Were you already married?
We had just gotten married,
Nice.
like a couple of months before we picked up and moved from Tennessee back to Atlanta.
Was she in the same program at Georgia Tech as you?
She was. She started off as a computer engineering major and had a similar epiphany as mine. And decided
She's in the game, right? I mean, she's in the
owns her
game.
own
Yeah.
business.
So what is she?
Yeah,
What if you don't have to go into it?
No, right now she during COVID, so 2020, she started a hydrovac excavation business in Northern Virginia, focusing on the mission critical market, and has been extremely successful. It's growing, and all the sleepless nights and pain of being a small
Entrepreneurship.
business owner is
Good times.
Yeah, it is good times, but you're doing it for yourself, and I've watched her really come into herself, and
It's the hardest journey.
show some amazing talents that she didn't even know she had. I knew it all along. I believed in her. But yeah, so that's been
It's
interesting.
got to be pretty amazing to be able to grow something in orbit or in parallel with your own career, with your partner. That's got to be something.
Yeah, it really is.
Not a lot of people get to do that.
You know, and I think a lot, I was working for Google at the time when she started that business, and a lot of people, I think, had the impression that it was my business and she was just running it.
Mm.
I don't know. There was
If
some
they've
talk
met
of
her,
that in the
you
market
can-
or whatever. If they've met her,
I've
yeah,
met her. She's her own person for sure.
You can rest assured. I really had nothing to do with it beyond just talking through it and signing some papers. I mean, literally overnight, she showed up with a bunch of trucks and, hey, I'm hiring people and I'm doing this, and I now have all this work and I'm revenuing, a significant amount of money every year.
Good for
And-
her, man.
Yeah, and I really have nothing to do with the business, which is really interesting because our pillow talk now is all about what's happening in her business, what's happening with what I'm doing.
Yeah, because you're
And-
both in startup mentalities.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I mean, even if she just started hers in COVID, which is the same time I did, I started mine in November 2019. I'm just now, 4.5 years into it, emerging out of startup. And I mean, it's not a function of time, it's a function of mistakes. When you are still making stupid startup mistakes, you're still in startup mode. When you become more mature and emerge, you don't make those startup mistakes anymore, right? So you could see when you start pivoting better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people often confuse startup mode and rapid growth as being the same thing, and they're not the same thing. You exit that startup mode and you continue that rapid growth to whatever the point of comfort or decision is.
It just, being able to emerge requires one thing, and that is stabilization.
Absolutely.
All right. And once you can stabilize, then you can standardize, right? And standardization is when you emerge out of a startup mode. And then when you get to a enterprise level, you're optimized, right? So stabilization, standardization, and optimization are the three phases you go to in these startup modes. And a lot of people don't realize that. So they're just fucking working and they don't understand what the goalpost looks like. And it's very disenchanting because as a successful entrepreneur, you're in the fetal position no less than once a month. I mean, like, am I doing the right things? You're just going to war with yourself. Inner bitch versus inner champion shit upstairs.
Mhm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
I'm sure your wife has it.
Absolutely.
Did I hire enough people? You only have a finite amount of resources? Did I invest it in the right channel of resources to generate the biggest return for, what am I doing with my time? And the best part is no matter how hard we try, you're not going to be able to level up unless you make mistakes.
That's right.
And you have to, everyone's going to make mistakes. That's the only place or opportunity of growth.
Exactly. Some of those mistakes are forced on you too. I remember a story from early on. We had, she had chosen to do business with a particular vendor for some of the hydrovac equipment who turned out to, they were not a good business.
They weren't aligned.
They were not aligned, and almost took her out, but she persevered, and she's like, okay, lesson learned. That's a tuition payment. Whatever money
Exactly
you
right.
lose you consider it a tuition payment as opposed to losing money on a deal because you're playing the long game.
Nobody else talks about it like a tuition payment, though. That is the best way to codify it. I haven't heard it told like that, but we describe it like those terms because, I had a business unit last year that lost $540,000 right over the course of 6 quarters before I decided that it was time to pivot. And someone was saying something to me. You look at the end of your balance sheet, and I'm like, no, you guys are looking at it all wrong. I paid $540,000 to learn what not to ever do, and that transcends into other channels or other business units that we have. So if it wasn't that, it was going to be something else.
Right.
You're going to have to learn.
Right. And that's not even counting the positive lessons learned, right? Like
Mm.
you learn, you pay some tuition for the lessons learned that bit you, but the fact that you did enough business to lose $540,000 means that some great things happen too. You got to practice your leadership chops. You got to practice your human resources chops, building a team, managing a team. There's a lot captured in that as well. I think people often focus on the negatives, on the losses as those tuition payments and the lessons learned, but there's
That's
more
easy
to it than that.
Yeah, I think the businesses that suffer have that mindset. It's a very common construct to think through because that's what society almost tells us, you should feel. But the reality is a great entrepreneur is so internally convicted and driven that not only will those problems not stop them, but they don't need your help either. They're
Right.
going to muscle through those things. And you have to really enjoy shared suffering and pressure testing. And you have to understand like there's great things in those things. And if you don't enjoy that, then you need to stick with the enterprise side and then you go help build someone else's dream. Because
Exactly.
it takes a lot to build your own. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So shifting back towards you, giving people the context, you grew up, you were a musician, it sounds like your whole life,
Yep.
pretty diverse one, it sounds like. And instead of going, that you were going to go missionary,
Right.
which is amazing. I mean, what a more selfless opportunity in life, right? And then you come back from that and said, I'm going to go join corporate America, and you went to a mechanical contractor?
I did. Yeah.
And your first program was a federal building?
Federal building. And then I did a train maintenance facility
Oh, wow.
for the Rapid Transit Authority in Atlanta, the North Line Rail Maintenance Facility, which is right there off 85. So anytime I'm in Atlanta, I drive through and say, "Hey, I built that."
Nice.
Was a lot of lessons learned on that project too. A couple more projects with that company. I left, went to work for a kind of as an owner's rep type role for a lending institution that focused on churches. So when churches would take out money for a loan, some of them were sophisticated enough to have their own construction teams and they just needed somebody to sign the pay apps. Others had nothing. So it was hand holding them the whole way through
Yeah. you were
conceptualization,
literally the owner
design,
of it, yeah.
everything. Credit crisis happened. That was around probably
Oh, wait.
08. Credit crisis happened. They lost a lot of their backing. So I got laid off from that. And a week later, I went to work for Johnson Controls, where I spent probably 6 or 7 years there.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah. And I was not at the lending company very long. So it was an easy transition back into the technical.
So, but I mean, like going into controls, people don't realize that's the nerve system.
Right.
So you just went from working on extremities to now you're working on the nervous system.
Right. And the controls piece always interested me very heavily when I was doing the mechanical work. So that was a natural shift. I had a good relationship with some of the leaders at Johnson Controls in Atlanta, and they said, "Hey, just come over here. We need people bad." And that's where I got my first taste of data center. So my first 2 projects with Johnson Controls were data center projects in Atlanta. And I said,
Enterprise or operator?
enterprise. Yeah. And I said, this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And then, so it's 2 jobs. And then the rest of my time at Johnson Controls, I didn't touch another data center, but I was doing mission critical work. So a lot of like chip fab, research, higher
Okay.
education, laboratories, healthcare, things like that. Even did some government energy work during the stimulus era days. Back at my alma mater, Georgia Tech, it was kind of cool to go back there and actually work
Really? Is it
in that
contractor?
environment. Yeah. Yeah.
That's kinda cool.
I was attached to their facilities.
How
and
long were you at
construction
Johnson
team.
Control for?
Close to, I think it was just a little more than 6 years.
Now, in that time, like just speaking on the data center side alone, because that's probably much denser on an MEP perspective than all the other things you were doing, unless you were
Right.
building hospitals maybe or something. But what did it introduce you to getting on the control side? Because controls is a daunting area. I view controls and commissioning as highly specialized.
Right.
And those are sometimes the hardest roles to fill because you have to have a creative ability to literally connect the brains of everything together in a very
Right.
complicated, very complex, sophisticated, and technical environment. What were you gaining from that? Because I know when I got onto the software side, I wasn't on controls. I was on like a 4-seer side when I got into an Eaton element where I was getting access, to the entire mechanical permutation because I started on just the electrical, right? So now I'm understanding how these brains tie into the mechanical plants. You started on the mechanical side and now you're probably getting exposed more to the electrical through controls? Or no?
Not so much. It was still mostly mechanical focused and then some other building systems, distributed antenna, fire alarms, and different things like that. I think what the Johnson Controls piece really did for me professionally was broaden my viewpoint. So where I was working for the mechanical contractor, it was more pumps and pipes and chillers and ductwork and equipment selection, things like that. how it all worked together, how it all interoperated was not something that we really dabbled in too terribly much, because in those days, there was no integrated offering. We would build our stuff. The controls guys would come in and do their stuff. We would start it up. The commissioning guys would show up if there was even commissioning on those jobs back in those days, and we would kind of walk away. So you never really got to see the holistic impact of one system on another and how the entire building ran as an ecosystem. And that's what I was exposed to. I was a working project manager, so I learned all the hands-on skills. I did installation, worked with tools on the bucket, installing things, learned how to program a little bit, not as good as the guys that do it every day, but enough to be dangerous. And it really gave me a bigger viewpoint. Just broadened it. And I started to see how all these systems work together, how you manage a building, how you maintain. I got interested in facilities operations. I didn't ever take that path, but dealing with the facility operations guys in these buildings, I really kind of fell in love with the idea of the bigger picture. So that was kind of the thing that drove me towards, okay, I don't want to just pigeonhole myself in mechanical or controls. I want to do the whole thing.
Yeah. The more I learned about the industry, the more I wanted to learn more about the industry.
Right, exactly. So, and there's a couple pathways for that. You could go the GC route. You could go the commissioning route, which is, holistic, or you could go the owner route. I decided I wanted to go the owner route. It took me a little way to, a little time to kind of navigate my way there.
But you knew at that point when you were working at Johnson Control that you wanted to be on the owner operator side?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so can I scratch the pain or double click on that for a sec?
Of course.
So was there something about the data center element that you liked why that? Why not go work at a hospital, I guess?
I just
Was
had
it the people or was it the technology?
It was the people, it was the technology, but I think the main force was I just had this feeling that this is the future. Blackberries were a thing, right?
I love those things.
iPhones come out, and if you're engaged in that industry and you see behind the green curtain and you understand what's going on and what fuels all of this, and you think about Moore's law and all the different things you hear about, I knew in 20 years it was going to be the biggest thing cooking, and it is. So it was a good guess or good intuition, whatever you want to chalk it up
I
to.
the same.
I saw it and I was like, okay,
it touches every element of technology. So
it's going to grow. It was the fastest project I ever saw. I couldn't believe how fast.
It was in Atlanta?
It was in Atlanta.
It was a QTS project?
No, it was a Hewlett Packard EYP project.
Oh, the Alpharetta or Sewanee ones. I was involved in those programs from EYP.
Yeah, both of them. But those buildings went up fast. One of them was a retrofit of an existing facility into a data center. The other was a ground up build. Those buildings happened so fast. I said, okay, if they need it this fast and they're willing to spend the money, then this is the next big thing. And this is where I need to place myself. And I just loved it. I thought it was cool. Big computer rooms. I'm kind of a nerd like most of us in this business are. And I just thought it was a neat, interesting take on things. Now I had done some, data centers first, and then I moved into buildings that had more critical systems than a data center does. So I really got a good education in, when you're building a lab and you've got systems in there that can actually take people's lives if you have a leaky pipe or something like that. I mean, it's just a different ballgame. So it really kind of gave me the right mindset for critical systems, safety, commissioning, really driving quality in these programs. And I have been able to take all that back to data centers over the years.
So having intuitive knowledge to look at the challenges that the industry faces through those optics is a huge advantage, right?
Absolutely.
It lends to the versatility of that leadership mindset because, it's funny, we started as an owner's rep, construction management, project management group, and we're like, we're just going to staff a bunch of PMs that build a lot of shit because there's plenty of needs for those.
Right.
So I realized that I bet you now, maybe only half of my team are construction manager, project managers. We do so much on safety, so much on scheduling, and so much on QA/QC because there's so much pressure on these programs now that the one thing they can't compromise, the number one KPI is always going to be safety. Number two is always going to be schedule. And number three will always be budget. So these budgets are typically managed by the CMPMs, but all the other elements to maintain the schedule and the budget without compromising the safety is really left to the schedulers, QA/QC, and safety. Right. So we are putting just as many of those people in the field now as we are project managers because those are the three most important variables in the industry today because it's a war. right now, right? I did you see the press release that Bloomberg wrote on the first day of the second quarter, which would have been like Monday, I think, this week.
I did not.
So I'll read you in. So Bloomberg did a pretty good report. They obviously worked on it for a bit because it has a press release regarding Amazon. And Amazon's decided to announce they're going to spend $150 billion in the next 15 years. So that's $10 billion a year on average for the next 15 years at a minimum. And it's interesting because they're coming off a scale in which they actually spent 2% less last year than they did the previous year, where simultaneously Microsoft spent 50% more this year than they did the year before. But there's a difference between one is a large cloud giant that has a 2x plus advantage over number two. But number two is really, who was outspending them last year, was really deploying a lot of capital towards AI. We already, ChatGPT, things like that. So we're seeing groups really, the cloud groups that are seeing there was a race over cloud. So you have the cloud wars that are taking place right now, and it's a show of force, right? But then you also have the AI wars, and both of them are aggregated in the same box that we play in. So we see density differences, but we don't see really differences in volume. They're big numbers. It's just the footprint or topology changes based on the density requirements, based on either the cloud product or the AI product. Do you agree?
I agree.
So what we're seeing is a huge change. And right now you're going to see with them making those types of announcements that's just going to put more pressure and intensity on the deliverer of the platform, which puts more pressure on you.
Right.
Like you have one of the hardest jobs in the industry, in my opinion, right now, because you have to play both ends against the middle. You have a very sophisticated client, doesn't matter who they are. They're all armed to the teeth now, right? And then you have a supply chain that is shocked through the amount of volume of demand they have.
Right.
So now you have to manage the expectations of someone who has a contract with an SLA saying you're going to meet a date. And if you don't, then there's liquidated damages or credibility to the market. And you have a supply chain that says, we're going to give you the best we can. But there's no guarantees. They don't care. What are you going to do if they don't miss? What are you going to do if they miss the date? Not buy their shit, right? The tail wags the dog right now. The supply chain has a lot of leverage. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%, 100%.
So having the insight at that young age to know that like, hey, I see that this requires more safety and more coordination for this or QA/QC, that is exactly what the industry has arrived at today. Those are the greatest drivers of our industry. But you saw that how long ago?
Gosh,
10, 12?
15 years now.
Yeah. So did you have any particular operator in mind, one specifically that you wanted to go to, or you just want to get in the game?
I just want to get in the game. Of course, everybody immediately goes to the big tech companies in Silicon Valley, which I've worked at a couple of them, right? And I think my first application, I applied at Google when I was still working for Johnson, and went through the interview process, and it was very, very interesting. And now that I've been on the other side of it and have seen how it works, I understand a little bit more about my situation. But I went and interviewed and I didn't hear anything back for like 6 months. And I'd actually taken another job. And then somebody called me and said, hey, I just want to let you know that we decided to go a different direction. I was like, yeah, me too. That was 6 months ago. Turns out the recruiter, he ended up leaving the company and my paperwork fell through the cracks. And I'm actually very thankful for that, because knowing what I know now, I don't think I would have done well in the role and the location and all the different components of what we were talking about. It wasn't the right timing. So another instance of the universe looking out for me as I kind of carved my path through the industry. So I ended up leaving Johnson Controls. I went to work for Eaton Corporation for a while. I did a lot of government energy work, so military bases, energy upgrade projects, very controls focused.
I'm Eaton alumni too. How long were you there for?
I was there about a year.
I was there for about 3 years.
Yeah, it was a small engineering firm that had access to some specific contracts with the Corps that Eaton wanted access to, so they bought the company. And over time, it kind of transitioned to Big Eaton, and I said, this is not for me. So I left there, went to work for DLB Associates for a little while, doing a project.
Where are they headquartered?
Well, these days they are all remote. At the time, they were headquartered in New Jersey, but they had an Atlanta office that I worked out of. Love those guys. Big shout out to my friends over there. Got some lifelong friends. Actually, one of the guys that I've worked with and my first job in my career landed at DLB and is still there. And we
Very well respected brand in this industry. They've done a lot to contribute to this industry.
absolutely. From DLB, I got recruited away to QTS, and that was my foot in the door on the owner side. So I went to work for Matt Tyndall, who
Of course.
yeah,
He's a
Matt's a
stud.
great guy.
Love Matt.
I think he's with Obix now.
Yeah, he has his own shop. I think,
Yeah,
or whatever
yeah.
it is. He was consulting for a bit.
Yeah, consulting. But I went to work for Matt doing development. I was responsible for a big project in Chicago. They converted the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper printing facility into a data center. So that was a very interesting project, that adaptive reuse kind of mindset, which they
Plus,
obviously
very
moved-
difficult market too.
Exactly. But they've obviously moved beyond that now with the rate at which they're growing and the funding that they have. They're building new facilities up out of the ground.
QTS at that time, though, was probably still one of the top 4. I mean, were they were publicly traded mission critical read at the time? I mean, they're private now, but they were probably public when you went to go work there, right?
They were.
They were a huge shop. Still
They
are.
had that
I mean, they're-
million square feet of white space in that facility in Midtown Atlanta. It was an amazing facility and one of the first like mega data centers that anybody had ever seen. Really unique company. Got a special place in my heart for those guys. Had a great experience there.
What was the relationship perspectives? I mean, your career, did you have, by then, were you collecting mentors or guides or sponsors or people of influence in the data center space? Were you building your relationships and your connections with data center people by then?
A little bit. I think when at QTS was really my first engagement where I was responsible for that top level relationship with general contractors and with the key trades. And at the time, most of my counterparts and most people in the industry were really only focusing on that GC relationship and letting them manage the key trades. And another lucky stroke of foresight, I said, okay, the GCs are not going to be the problem in the future as this continues to grow. It's going to be solid relationships with key MEP trades.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was a world I understood a little better than the GCs.
you
So
came
I
from
was, so I was kind of closer to those guys, could talk the same language. But I learned very quickly that with the labor constraints that we were seeing even back then, that it was the right time to double down on those relationships. So started to gather a good network with MEP providers in particular, and then my network with general contractors began to expand. Mentorship, maybe not so much at that point.
You didn't have anybody that came in and said, I like the way you're approaching this.
No, not so much. Not so much. It worked and we did good things and we had success. But when I made that transition from QTS to Facebook, when I got recruited away to Facebook, that's when the mentorship and the real relational focus started to happen.
Really? Oh, okay. Because you have like Das Garolos was, I mean, I'm not sure how active he is now, but he's probably one of the most humble giants I've ever met.
Great guy.
And I haven't spoken with him for a bit, but there were times where the optics and how he was able to view things, because at the time, I mean, who was building more than you guys at that time?
I mean, Google was big. Facebook was big. Facebook was outpacing Google.
That's what I thought.
During the years I was there.
There's wars. You guys are always going back and forth. But there was a time where, I mean, I remember sitting down with him and he was, probably responsible for lots of billion-dollar decisions in those times. And he'd still make time to talk to me about $6 million data center things, and has the patience to talk through and be like, hey, let's figure out how this could work for you. He was always trying to help people become successful. Yeah. And I found that to be a very admirable skill from a leader. So guys like Darren have had a huge impact on this industry through you, but even dopes like me that had, small interactions with him in there and there, but that's how you have to act as a leader is what I learned.
Exactly. Huge personal impact on me. I mean, Darren, I didn't work directly with Darren, but we had a lot of contact and just a great human being, humble, smart. Oh my gosh, that guy's so smart. And always had a time to listen, always had a time to give you feedback, give you thoughts on your approach to specific problems. I felt like he was always my biggest fan. And that's another good characteristic of a leader is like, you need to know that your leader believes in you. And I felt like he believed in me and believed in what we were trying to accomplish. At Facebook, I was on I'm not sure what their structure is like anymore. Things change in that world so fast, but I was on a small Tiger team that focused on retrofits. So some of the aging facilities, we were doing electrical, mechanical retrofits, and then we started to pick up some of the other projects that nobody else really knew what to do with. It wasn't new construction and it wasn't a break fix, so it didn't go to the new construction guys and it didn't go to ops. It came to us. Ended up getting involved in some redundancy projects that were not necessarily retrofits, but they were just added redundancy to the facility. Some larger programmatic projects that were kind of a break fix nature, but more of a preventive break fix. So we termed it a retrofit. We did some security projects, just kind of anything and everything everywhere. About halfway into my tenure there, I got plugged into the Northern Virginia market. I was living in North Carolina in Forest City, working at the Forest City Facebook data center. Started traveling to Northern Virginia on a weekly basis doing colo fit outs for Facebook for their third party program. And that's how I got plugged into that market. And that's, another giant step in the right direction, because Northern Virginia, everybody knows that's where it's
The
at.
headquarters of the world.
You start to meet people there. You start to get involved in some of the industry organizations. I start to not trying to throw any shade on North Carolina, but when I look at Northern Virginia versus North Carolina and where I'd like my family to be and where I'd like to live and the school systems, I thought Northern Virginia was far superior. So I had made the decision to move to Northern Virginia with Facebook, and then Google came and recruited me away for a job that required no travel, building their enterprise data center portfolio in Northern Virginia specifically, and then that kind of expanded to Mid-Atlantic.
Were you on Steve's team or who?
So at the time, I was brought on board by Brett Rogers.
Oh, of course, he's been on the podcast.
I would say Brett's probably the most impactful leader I've ever had. Completely changed my whole viewpoint on
Nice.
how I look at myself, how I operated in the industry. That guy just has an uncanny ability to ask the right question at the right time that just completely shatters whatever confidence you have. And, there's a couple of ways to deal with that. You can either let it shatter your confidence, or you can say, he figured out the thing that I don't know. I need to go learn that. I need to figure it out. And I experienced massive amounts of growth with Brett as my leader.
He, his presence, his intensity in his presence made me, I was surprised when he told me he wasn't former military.
Yeah.
Right. But he also is obviously, as a leader, you realize, the pressure that you put on people will either make the diamond or the splat mark. In either way,
Exactly.
it needs to be discovered. Right. So doesn't surprise me that that's the way.
Yeah. And he knows how to throttle it back and forth too. So I think that was some good lessons for me as I moved into more of a leadership role and leading people, managing people directly. His ability to kind of understand how much he can take and push a little bit beyond that over time to, it's like progressive overload strength training, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what he did for my capabilities as a leader and as a project manager. And I've stolen a lot of lessons from him that I put into play every day now. Funny story though, kind of tying back to Brett. So maybe 3 or 4 months after I started at Facebook, a friend of mine from DLB who had moved on, he was working for CBRE at the time, called me and said, "Hey, I got this great job to come on board as an owner's rep in the program I'm working in at Google. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Man, I just took a job at Facebook, but you know what? My dad's looking for a job. You should talk to him because he's forgotten more about all this stuff than I'll probably ever know." Dad got that job. Dad's been,
Where's your dad at?
he's in Northern Virginia now.
But where did,
This was in Atlanta,
but he took the job at
CBRE.
Okay.
Still working at CBRE, and he was working for Brett on the Google program. And he's been at Google longer than I was there, still working on that program now.
No kidding.
Through some discussion, I guess Brett used to live in Northern Virginia and he was in Atlanta. And my dad said, "Hey, my boss at Google is this great guy named Brett Rogers. You should talk to him because he used to live in Northern Virginia." This is when my wife and I were house shopping. So we developed a relationship totally not based on the industry, talking about, hey, where are the good schools? What's fun stuff to do in Northern Virginia? Just kind of building that relationship. And then I remember one day he called me and said, "Hey, tell me what it is you do for Facebook again." And I explained, and he said, "I think I might have a job for you if you want to go to Northern Virginia. Let's get you in the pipeline." And it worked out. I was the first FTE in the enterprise program in Northern Virginia for Google. And then very shortly after, the ops lead, a guy named Zach Miller, transferred up from South Carolina to be there with me. So we were the initial two. We grew the team. There was no Google enterprise infrastructure in Northern Virginia at the time.
Get out.
We had on the first building, on the first site, we had a couple of the precast walls stood up when I joined, and that was it. And so we took it a long way over 6 years and built a big program and a big team, and it was a lot of fun.
I was like, how much? So like in that 6 years, how massive of an impact did that make to the trajectory of what you're doing now? Like, what was the greatest gain?
It was transformative. I'm going to tie it all back to Brett's leadership, right? And then the subsequent leadership, because Brett moved on to a different team within Google, and then he moved out, and Steve Ford became my manager. But the leadership at Google and the focus is so broad, right? That it really just exposed me to so many more things. And you know, the longer you stay at a place like Google, the longer you live in that echo chamber. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you're focused on one thing and one very specific bespoke design and product, that I obviously can't go into any details on. You you have There are a lot of pros to that because you become an expert in it, and you solidify your position. But I've always had this itch to do more and different and bigger and better and other, right? So I started thinking, man, if I stick around too much longer, I think I'm only going to know how to do this, and I'm going to lose track of everything else. And I had the distinct advantage of being in Northern Virginia and having so many friends in the industry, and seeing all the other construction going on, and just understanding what everybody else was doing. But if I was in a remote location, somewhere where Google was the only game in town, that's all I would know. And I wouldn't be able to apply that effectively to the rest of the industry, which was kind of the impetus for me leaving. Had a great opportunity as a plank owner at the new organization I'm with, and said, hey, okay, it's time to take a bet on myself and put all this stuff I've learned from Brett and from Steve and from all the brilliant engineers and project managers, and just everybody at Google is a top-notch Class A person. And let's put all that knowledge into play and see what I can do. So I made the jump back in December of last year. So I'm just a few months in at TA.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a pretty amazing story. If I could scratch the paint though on, so that's a professional story, and that's an admirable. I mean, you could see how you were creating like a Lego brick build of leveling up throughout career, right? And being immersed around great people. I mean, even when you were at Facebook or Meta, I mean, like Rihanna, like Tom Earp was there. I used to work with him at Page on the Page. Was he over there by then?
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of overlap.
Oh, okay, because
but he was there, and he was doing some different things.
I got you, but I mean, like I know there were some very talented people over there from Furlong all the way down, right? And so you're around these really innovative people, and then you go to Google, and you have guys like Brett, and I've had the privilege of meeting him. I've never met a single person that didn't have something very positive to say. That man seems like we all have a purpose in life, right? And everybody has, we're fulfilled in what we're doing as long as we're in service of that purpose. Sometimes some people are there to protect and inspire and shit, and some people are there to make an impact. And he seems to have that purpose, because everyone you talk to, like Alfonso Portillo, another guy that I have a great deal of respect for, right. Laramie Doris, another guy I have a great deal of respect for. Both those guys, I remember asking him, like, you ever heard of this guy? And both of them's response, and they don't give out those responses often. You don't hear people like that putting other people on, not pedestals, but on a top shelf. Right. And they're both like as good as they come. So obviously I'm sitting here and I'm dealing with
100%. I attribute a lot of where I'm at and where I'm headed to him. And we still talk probably once a week. We're buddies, right?
Awesome.
We
Is he at Yonder now? Where's he at?
He is at EdgeCore.
Working
working on Lee Kessler's team over there.
Great place for him.
Yeah, Lee's an awesome guy, and he's assembled a really killer team over there with Brett and with Dave Rezash. Like, this is
there's a lot of talent over there.
Got an awesome team, great people. Yeah,
they're gonna do well. Yeah. So going back to you at that time, like we were sons before we were anything else. We were brothers before we became. Before you were a father, you were a husband. So there's all these other journeys that we take. Were you, what were you doing to grow yourself? Like, I know that I'm constantly absorbing what I call home improvement material, which is podcasts about making myself healthier, stronger. I believe in trying to make myself healthier and stronger mentally, emotionally, or mentally, physically, spiritually, all of it. Right. So were things taking shape in your life, other circumstances within your life at that time that were they having an influence on how you were taking your career, or was this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think being a father, I've got two kids. My daughter is 16 now. My son's 18, getting ready to graduate from high school. At the time, I was really focused on trying to be the best father I could possibly be. And I was spending a lot of time away from home. I mean, the last year and a half at Facebook, I was on the road Monday through Friday almost every week. Mm-hmm. And that really started to wear on me. And I said, man, this just doesn't feel right. If I was a young single guy, or, married with no kids, then we could probably work it out. But it just wasn't working. So I think that really drove me to take advantage of that Google opportunity because it was a no travel job. And even,
Yeah, that's a changer.
even up until the very end, I had a period of time, about 18 months, where I was covering some of our operations in Latin America with Google and traveling down there. But up to that point, I hardly traveled at all. Maybe a day trip to New York periodically, maybe a couple days in California here and there. It was extremely rare because I had so many engineers and so many people on the Eastern Seaboard. People would come in to see what we were doing. I didn't have to go; people came to me, and that was a great thing for my family, great
Yeah.
thing for my wife, for my kids. Just the being able to be present. Right at the beginning, let me take a step back. When I was in North Carolina, I've got, my best friend is a guy named Perry Hughes. He's an awesome guy. He's got a pretty cool podcast about fatherhood that he's on. I'll share it with you. But he told me about this dude named Jocko Willink. And I was like, oh, what is this? And I listened to one podcast and I was like, it's too macho for me. Like, I'm not interested.
Good.
Yeah, I don't have time for this. Right. But then I started listening as I was flying on planes and I said, wow, this guy has developed a language around some of the things that I've kind of figured out on my own and I believed about ownership, owning your successes, owning your failures,
Accountability.
how you give credit out, all these different things, how you deal with people, just stuff that I learned the hard way. And I'm like, man, where was this book 15 years ago? It could have saved me a lot of headache. So I got into that. And when I went to Google, I said, hey, I want to double down on this because I think there is a significant lack of leadership training that translates to like a common purpose and a common language that you use on the job site with these teams. So over the years, I was able to actually bring Jocko's team from Echelon Front in to do training with construction teams and share that language. I'd buy people copies of the book and I'd start to hear them use some of the buzzwords in the room and on the projects. And I saw some very strong empirical evidence that was working and it was the right way to do things. Projects coming in with the best safety record anybody's ever seen, under budget, faster than expected, and then you set the bar even higher for the next project and you beat that. And that's a credit to the team and a credit to the people. But I think that those teams were very cohesive because of what we were trying to do from leadership. So that really changed my life, and I owe a lot to those guys, but particularly Dave Burke, who works on Jocko's team. For a short period of time, he was local in Virginia. He's since moved to California, but I would see him. He would come and we would talk, and he would pour into me and pour into my leadership abilities. And that has blossomed over the years into, okay, what's the next battle? What's the next thing that I need to take care of? So, really focusing on being an even better husband because my son's getting ready to graduate and move on to the next thing, daughter in a couple of years. So how can I pour into this relationship with my wife and make sure when they leave, I don't have a roommate, I've got a wife, right?
Yeah.
How do I take better care of my health? How do I, drive this entrepreneurial spirit in everything that I do and really just kind of level up as a human being? So that, you want to talk about mentorship. There's direct and indirect mentorship from those guys and from that ecosystem into my professional and personal life.
So I'll tell you, I can find a great deal of not only inspiration, which is fleeting, right? But I find a lot of like the rules of engagement out of those books sometimes when I call it the ROE, but it's really they're they outline the skills that are necessary to
Right.
create better habits. It all coalesces around the discipline models that they really
Mhm.
try to influence. But I'm a big fan of a lot of what he had. I mean, look, for what it's worth, around that same time that you were doing that, I bet you $1,000,000 when I was at Align Data Centers, we were buying 30 of those books at a click and handing them out to all the senior leaders. So I'd make all the PMs and the supers at least have it. And then they'd have book clubs, once a month
Yeah.
or every 2 weeks. They were doing things. We would sit in them with them and we'd go chapter at a time. Hey, this month or this week or the next 2 weeks, we're going to cover this chapter together. And then in the next 2 weeks we'd get together and we're like, what did you get out of it?
Right.
Was there anything relevant? And that's all that matters. I mean, unless it's just a bunch of shitty cool stories, what's the relevance and how does that transcend into what we do in technology? And really, it all falls back to leadership.
Exactly.
And I needed that too, right? So we were all singing from the same sheet of music, but we can't get enough of that still. I mean, I think that leadership is two things, right? Leadership starts with I think a lot of people that try to teach leadership focus on leading others only. And there needs to be more books written about leading yourself first.
Amen.
And there's a guy that used to work at Echelon Front. He's a Team 3 guy. I just did a podcast with him yesterday. I'm going to be on his podcast soon. Everyday Warrior on Men's Journal, I think. And his name's Mike Sorelli. He's a SEAL Team 6 guy. He was a Force Recon Marine sniper first. Yeah, I'm not sure if he's more Marine or more SEAL, right? But when you deal with him, you can tell that he's both. And he was an enlisted guy and an officer, so he learned how to lead from the enlisted side and then learned how to lead from the officer side, right? And he was a troop commander and all that shit. So he's a real deal. But I'll tell you, he takes it down. So he's got a part of that Jocko stuff with it, right? But I think that he really picks up where that left off on that book, like Extreme Ownership. I love that book. Did you?
Oh yeah.
Did you get Dichotomy of Leadership after that?
Absolutely.
It was just more of the same for me. I was like, I don't even think I finished the second one because I was like, that one felt it was more self-serving. I'm not attacking Jocko or any of those people, but I'm like, that's more of the same book. But I liked the first one enough. I want to pick up where it leaves off. I don't need another dose of that. It's like having a second portion where I'm like, I'm ready for the other part, you know? And I've been looking for that. And I feel like he's someone that he and I fell more in alignment, Sorelli and I did on, and he's the CEO of the Talent War Group, and they were all part of Echelon Front at some point, right? And it's good because we need those types. We need what Jocko's doing too, because he's a huge recruiter for the military and he inspires a lot of people. But that is the marketing that he creates is fantastic, and it really allows it to stay there a little bit longer than normal. But I need something that's going to be omnipresent and forever, that will be more focused on not making them feel good, but I need more of that stuff that I took out of the book, which was the skill set development.
Yeah.
Like that's what you got out of it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that they do have plenty of continuances of that through some of the training exercises that they do, their muster events. It's the continued engagement in that ecosystem that really drives that self-leadership piece, right? And I liked a couple of things that you said that really resonate with me, and it's something that I say a lot too, is a lot of people argue about whether or not great leaders are born or made, right?
Yeah.
I think leadership is a skill, and like any other skill, you can train it. And you have to train it if you want to be a good leader. Some people are naturally going to be better at it than others, but that doesn't mean that it's not for everybody. And everybody all the way down to the bottom level. The guy on the bucket is the kind of the ubiquitous metaphor I use for the people out in the field that help me take care of my family. The guy on the bucket who's turning the screwdriver, that guy's a leader because he's leading himself to do the right thing, to have quality work, to stay safe, to do his part on the job or her part. That person is making decisions. They've got a decision matrix. They've got left and right limits, and their leader above them has given them those limits, and they're making decisions within the boundaries of their scope. They have to know how to lead as well. Everybody's a leader. How much authority and responsibility you have is what differs. And through training and skill development in your leadership, that's how you can climb that leadership ladder up to the top.
I like all of that. I mean, like the big phrase is always, steel sharpens steel or iron sharpens iron. And he and I were talking about yesterday. I'm like, I just like a different phrase for it. Like, I really think it's people sharpen people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I want to humanize it more because that's what it is. And you don't have to be a Jocko to be a great leader. I think sometimes there's people that we think are great leaders and they're just really good communicators maybe sometimes, and they don't even practice what they espouse. Right. So we're becoming more aware. There's more books out there that help us identify what leadership looks like. I'm more focused on I've always looked at some groups as a product in which they could catch you a fish for the day. And I want the product that's going to teach me how to fish so I could feed myself for life, right? That whole, I don't know what that proverb was, the Chinese proverb, but catch a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for life. And I felt like I hit a plateau what I was getting because I took all that same stuff that you were doing on the EF side. And then finally I was like, had enough of that. I need to find what's after that phase, right? And I that's the part that's most prevalent. And again, I think what the military does is they condition. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that there's a group better than the military at redefining the constitution of a human being in less than 10 weeks. What we call our sons and daughters when we ship them off to basic training, when they graduate and pass and review 8, 10, 12 weeks later, we call them soldiers, sailors, and airmen. And all they have to do is serve a few days in that uniform. And if they leave after that, they're a veteran. So they could literally go and enter community with a completely different skill set, because the pressure testing, the stress inoculation they go through will rewrite the Constitution as a person, right? Like it's interesting how it tears everybody down to build you back up to where you're no longer putting yourself first. The mission and the command come first, and then you're last. And the greatest benefit of a veteran is, you'll never hear them say it's not their job. The worst part is you'll never hear them say that's not my job. So getting them to realize, like, hey, look, you don't have to be at all, right? That's something that gets lost in transition, I think, for a lot of veterans. But I'm talking about, I like how the military has done a good job of figuring out a way to recreate humans, and those that teach us in that environment to be strong leaders are teaching us how to lead others, or how to be led by others. What I think Jocko's book left off on, and what I'm working with Sorelli on picking up where that off, is how to lead yourself.
Right.
Because if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others,
100%.
right? And you could have, just like we know from a health, and I know that you're very into your health and fitness, and I am too. You could have your diet on lockdown, and you could have your nutrients and your hydration and your sleep and your workouts. But if your mind's not right, you're still unhealthy, right? So for me, it's trying to take a bunch of military people that are all grenade jumping by mindset control, like, hey, let me go help, be selfless, to where actually as a civilian, the only way to be a really strong leader is to put yourself first. You have to put your mask on first before you help others. You can't give yourself 100%. How are you going to go give them 100%? So you have to be at 100% to maximize your output and productivity so you could have an impact. I mean, Adam Black at 30% is not as effective a leader as 100%. And it seems selfish, but you have to put yourself first.
No,
So
absolutely.
it flips the whole model, right? That's why I'm saying is, like, dude, don't get me wrong. I've read Jocko's books. I love all that shit. But the model leaves off on where we work on ourselves, I think, a little bit. And I needed help with that. I needed more of that. And having the skills to learn how to delegate and manage effectively and be tactical. And, those are things that I got out of those things.
Well,
I needed that too.
I would counter by saying, not that I'm challenging, but
You're allowed to challenge.
well, but I don't want to, because
Yeah. It's a
I
conversation.
think it's valid, right? But the self-development piece that I took from what they teach is, okay, take all these leadership mindsets and skills that they talk about, turn them inward. Now,
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
right. So when I talk about ownership, I talk about ownership of the fact that, yes, I am passionate about my health and my fitness, and I want it to get better, contrary to what I might look like right now. I got a few pounds I want to lose, and I got, I need to get jacked and do all these things. But that same concept of, okay, if my team makes a mistake and I own that mistake and say, hey, I didn't set you up for success here. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it next time. I have to give myself that same unemotional evaluation of, hey, did you really need that extra slice of pizza? Next time, get up and walk or drink a glass of water, and then, wait a minute and decide. Like, giving yourself that same treatment as you lead yourself. Like, I think that leadership model that's presented in those books is highly effective. I've seen it work. And if you can apply those same characteristics to how you treat yourself, that's where the magic happens, when you start to lead yourself. And
what do you think the challenges are in that?
challenges
Why
in
do
that?
you think people aren't doing that better?
I
I have an idea, but I want to hear yours.
think I think life's too easy. If we want to get all the way down to it, nobody, within reason, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but I can't remember the last time I met somebody here in the United States of America that had to worry about where their next meal's coming from.
Fair.
Life is all about comfort. Life is all about entertainment and ease. And nobody wants to do the hard things. And, transition to like a workforce development discussion here, which we should probably talk about too, because that's the next big challenge. My wife sees it in her business where she's hiring blue collar workers who have a choice to make. Do they want to sit home? They can go on Twitch and they can play video games and stream and make money doing that. Or they can go work hard in the field in a construction environment. That's a tough decision. It's not a tough decision for me. I've made my choice. But for a lot of people, including people my kids' age, they're looking at the way the world is right now and they're like,
I'll be an
why
influencer.
am I going to go do something hard? I want to be an influencer. We were at a boot store yesterday looking at cowboy boots here in
Allen's?
Austin. No, we went to well, we did go there, but we went to the Takeover store next door, and they were having an influencer event, and it was all these people in there, and they're getting boots and doing the little branding and everything. And I'm thinking, this is very strange. It's a different ecosystem. It's a new model of life and work that just adds to the comfort that people are able to get. Because there's a, I don't want to say it's not hard work, because I know some people that do that and they put a lot of effort into the marketing and the video editing
a lot
and
of passion.
podcasting and everything. And it is hard work, but all that hard work's hidden, right? So kids will look at TikTok and Instagram and they'll say, I want to do that. Like, this looks easy.
Looks easy.
Looks super easy. I want to do that. And they don't understand all the hard work that goes into it. So I think when life gets easy and you are not challenging yourself and you're not doing the hard things, then it's really hard to lead yourself, because at the core of leadership, it's about making the tough decision at the right time. There's time component. There's a difficulty of decision. What are you going to do? Sometimes you're making a decision with 80% of the information that you need. Sometimes it's 50%. Sometimes you know exactly what to do. If you don't have hard decisions to make because you haven't challenged yourself, then how can you lead yourself? If you don't have a North Star, if you don't have a direction that you're headed in, a mission and a purpose, and you're making the steps and the difficult steps to get there, to climb that mountain or do whatever, Alex Honnold is a really inspirational character with his free climbing, and he's got a mission and a route, and he knows exactly what he's going to do, and it's life-threatening and it's challenging. And that guy, everything he puts in his body, every night he sleeps, everything is intentional, because he has put himself on that path. He leads himself because he's trying to rise to a challenge that's bigger than himself. And I think in today's age, you asked, why is it hard for people to do that? I think it's because they don't have that mission or purpose or North Star. They have an idea of what success looks like, but they haven't challenged themselves to the point where they really understand what it takes to get there. And you don't have to lead yourself if you're living in mom's basement playing video games on Twitch all day.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. And I'm glad that we're having these conversations, because every time I talk to someone else, they get to widen the aperture in how I get to view a problem or a challenge or an opportunity, right? And one of the things, I was having a conversation this morning in a meeting where they were talking about, challenges in society, and, we have challenges we have human beings that work for us. The primary line of business I use to generate revenue is a human being, right? So I don't build data centers. I don't even build teams. I don't even build leaders. All we do is have an incubator for building relationships with others, which lends us to the opportunity to have more leaders, which build more teams, and those teams build more data centers. But my product is humans, right? So I'm really more focused on the development of that. Although I really love building data centers, I really love building up better people. And that is a messy job, right? Because it turns out every human being thinks differently, and they have their own emotional response to shit. And the arguments that they were having was with regards to human resource related challenges. And I got a guy on my team that I've talked to before. I've never really talked with. He's been on town halls where we've communicated, so I've seen him, and he has a message about his own personal constitution as a man. He uses social media to express it, and he does it in a way that could be abrasive for others. So we had to have a conversation and be like, listen, man, I admire you, and you've earned the right. You've rebuilt yourself. There's nothing more dangerous than a person that's rebuilt themselves. I could admire and respect anybody that's hit a rock bottom and then found the grit to get out of it, whether it's faith that got them out of it, whether it's their own, love of someone else or the grace of someone. But this person, I think his intent was to do things that inspired a lot of people with the words that he was using. I just think that he's in a phase in which he's using words that he doesn't realize could also become very polarizing. So you have to tighten that message up. And one of our clients was talking to us, and we had a long conversation as managers and leaders on that. And I was like, look, man, our businesses cannot be an incubator for society's problems. But there's a reason why some of those problems exist. I'm older than you, but I was born and raised in a time where when we go to certain places, your parents would say, hey, Just don't talk about politics or don't talk about religion
Right.
and don't talk about sexual things at all. And that way everything will be civil. And what happened is we created a society in which no one has the skills to talk about those things, which is why there's only conflict.
Right.
Right. And the only way to de-escalate that conflict is to have those conversations. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
And I think that we also were born and raised and you tell me if you agree with this or not, but there are a lot of people. I think the biggest challenge to growth for people, for some, it's just they don't know how. They don't know where. Like you went out and you were out in a group of people that have very proven. Jocko was really packaging and reselling pieces of things that he had learned and iterated off of from the military. That's why I'm like, the military has done an amazing job from boot camp all the way to the way they do advanced training on creating and building leaders, right? And thank God we have people like Jocko that are out helping spread that to communities and societies and humanities, because we need more of that. And I'm not saying what they were doing is wrong. I think that that was just one piece of it. There's another piece that people, the only challenge I ever have when people talk to me about Jocko is I'm like, he's not a silver bullet for everything. He's a good piece of it, but there's other pieces that you need to add to that,
Right.
like the part that you're taking inside. The part that takes inside, you don't have this and I don't have this. We wouldn't be talking, right? People equate with being wrong is failing. And a lot of people don't like to be wrong. They don't like to fail because they were also born and raised that if you make a mistake, you're wrong. If you make a mistake, you're failing, and failing is bad. So a lot of people don't look at failing as what it really truly is, which is the greatest gift and opportunity to grow and learn. You don't learn from a fucking thing you do right. You have to make mistakes. So a lot of people, I think, just like we've been, conditioned, and now we're learning the mistakes of what happens when you teach a society to not talk about things that are critical, and then you give them a technology platform that opens it up to anybody to talk about it. No kidding, it has an unintended consequences on society. But I think those things will fix themselves, just like a lot of the other. Every time that we have technology, an introduction of new technology, there's unintended consequences. You worked for a social media company. How many people have killed themselves because they got access to social media and were bullied? Well, we don't know. I don't know. I'm sure there's people that track that, but we know that that's an unintended consequence. So now, as our industry becomes more mainstream, you'll see ethics rolled into what we do.
Right.
And those ethics will force us to take 6 months to pause and think about what this will do to impact society before we roll it out, right? I mean, we're in the Wild Wild West. Our industry is the Wild Wild West.
Absolutely.
But these pioneers that built it will one day fall into areas of government and policy to protect us and to allow us to continue to grow. They're the only ones that will understand it. But there's government that's going to be paying attention because now we're putting such a massive pressure on the infrastructure of our grid that they're going to be like, what are you misfit toys? What's this data center industry that's just now emerging? And what are you guys all about? We need to start thinking about how we roll you into every other monitor of governance to make sure we're not doing anything to fracture society. So we're going to see this industry emerging mainstream. Do you agree?